There's a moment, just a breath, a blink, when a room full of diamonds and designer gowns can turn into a cage. A glamorous cage, sure, but a cage all the same. And on this night, the night that should have shimmered with effortless elegance, that transformation happened so quickly, so violently, that even the most seasoned celebrities were left stunned. Some whispered, some stared, some pretended not to notice, but all of them felt it. But before we continue, please subscribe and turn on the notification bell for updates. Tell me this, what does it look like when a fairy tale fractures? Not quietly, not politely, but in the kind of spectacular, slow-motion collapse that only a high-society gala can deliver? Because that's what happened tonight. At least, that's what people would later claim. You're here because you saw the title. You're here because you heard whispers. Maybe a rumor, maybe a meltdown, maybe something far stranger. And you're here because deep down, you know the world of celebrity is crafted like a perfume ad. Beautiful lighting, flattering silhouettes, carefully choreographed smiles. But what happens when the script goes off the rails? Let's begin somewhere unexpected. Not at the exit where she fled, not at the moment security shifted their posture, and not even at the whisper that supposedly ignited the entire thing. No, let's begin with the feeling in the room. Because sometimes the air changes before the drama begins, like clouds thickening before a storm. Imagine it. The L'Oréal Paris Women of Worth Gala. Not just any anniversary, but the 20th, a milestone draped in prestige. The kind of event where the invitation feels less like paper and more like a passport to validation. High ceilings, a gilded glow, the scent of expensive perfume floating like invisible silk. Photographers lined up like soldiers, lenses gleaming. Every A-lister who mattered, or believed they mattered, was there. And into that room walked Meghan. Now pause. Think about this. When someone with that level of public attention enters a space like this, what do you expect to happen? Flashbulbs? Absolutely. Whispers? Of course. A strange cocktail of admiration, suspicion, envy, and fascination? Always. But tonight, there was something else. Something even she felt before she crossed the threshold. A shift, a subtle tightening in the atmosphere. The kind that makes you check your posture, adjust your smile, wonder if you've forgotten something important. Have you ever felt like an entire room was waiting for you to make the wrong move? That's where our story starts. She stepped onto the carpet with the practiced grace of someone who'd done this dance hundreds of times. But tonight her steps were just half a beat too careful. Her expression, at first calm, flickered with something more fragile when she caught sight of the cluster of A-listers gathered in a semicircle near the entrance, like a panel of silent judges. Not hostile, just watching too intently. And that is where the first spark ignited. Not from anyone else. From her. Because the truth is, when you expect judgment, you start seeing it everywhere. Isn't that true in real life too? Haven't we all walked into a room and felt like everyone somehow knew something about us? Now here's a detail most people wouldn't notice. The first 3 photographers didn't call her name. Not right away. Maybe they didn't see her. Maybe they were distracted. Or maybe they were waiting to capture her expression before she masked it. But that pause, that 1-second gap, it felt like an hour. Flash, flash, flash. The lights finally erupted, but the moment had already carved its place in her chest. Still, she moved forward. And yet, even as she smiled, her eyes kept darting, scanning the crowd as if searching for an anchor. Or maybe searching for an exit. The truth lives in the smallest cuts, and tonight, the cuts were everywhere. Have you ever been surrounded by people who looked right through you? Because that's what it looked like from the outside. The world watching her, while the people inside the room behaved as if she were a hologram that only half worked. But that's not the shocking part. Not yet. The shocking part is what she felt in that moment. Something darker, heavier. That sinking sensation when you realize people may not want you there. Whether it's true or not doesn't matter. What matters is that you believe it. And belief can turn into panic faster than truth ever could. As she walked deeper into the venue, something happened to the crowd. Conversations quieted, just slightly, as if everyone collectively inhaled. Not enough for a scene. Not enough for any rationally minded person to say, "Ah yes, the drama begins here." But enough for an emotionally wired person, someone on edge, to sense danger. Why? You might be wondering. Because earlier that day, something had happened. Something that primed her for the worst. Something we won't reveal yet, but trust me, it matters. It colors everything. It rewrites the entire night. Think of this introduction as the first pull on a thread. The more we pull, the faster the sweater unravels. Let's step back for a second. Why does this story matter now? Why is this moment resonating with so many people, sparking arguments, think pieces, gossip, outrage? It's not just because Meghan is a celebrity. It's not because people love drama. It's because we live in a world where reputations swing on tiny hinges. One video clip, one misunderstood facial expression, one whisper from a stranger, and suddenly the world declares judgment. Tonight is a study of how that happens. And it doesn't matter whether you love her, hate her, or fall somewhere in between. What matters is understanding how a person with a global spotlight can still feel utterly alone in a crowded room. She adjusted her dress, smoothed her hair, lifted her chin. Cameras caught the moment, of course. The internet would later freeze it, crop it, slow it down, zoom in, debate it, analyze it. Some would say she looked scared. Others would say she looked arrogant. Others still would insist she looked guilty. Of what? No one could say. But in that moment, the truth was simple. She felt outnumbered. Have you ever had that feeling, even for a second? That crawling sense that you're being evaluated, not for what you're doing, but for who you are? That feeling is where stories like this take root. Now, here's where things get interesting. As Meghan moved toward the staircase that led to the main hall, a grand, sweeping structure meant to make everyone feel majestic, she stopped. Not dramatically, not theatrically, just a tiny stutter in her step. But that hesitation, that millisecond of doubt, it would change the course of the entire night. Why did she stop? That's the question people kept asking afterward. And depending on who you listened to, the answer changed. Some said she'd seen someone glaring at her. Some claimed she'd been given a look by staff. Others insisted it was a text on her phone. Truth is, what she saw at the top of those stairs is the spark of our entire documentary. And no, we're not going to reveal it now. Not yet. Because the power of a story isn't in the answer. It's in the tension before the answer drops. Besides, we're only beginning. This introduction is your doorway into a night where every glance, every whisper, every seating assignment, every raised eyebrow carried the weight of a scandal waiting to erupt. And it did erupt. But not for the reasons you think. Before we get ahead of ourselves, you need to understand something else about this gala. It wasn't just a celebration of women's achievements. It wasn't just a red carpet event. It wasn't even just a gathering of celebrities. It was a hierarchy and sequence. A social chessboard. A quiet war zone. And every person in that room knew exactly where they stood. Except, perhaps, the one woman who felt the floor shifting beneath her feet. As she paused on that staircase, she took a slow, sharp breath. A breath people would later misinterpret 100 different ways. Was she overwhelmed? Was she angry? Was she bracing herself? Ask yourself this. How do you interpret the emotions of someone you already have opinions about? Exactly. The power of perception is the real villain of this story. And as she stood there, frozen for just that one heartbeat, she realized something she wouldn't say aloud. The room had already made up its mind about her. But here's the twist. The room was wrong. Or maybe she was wrong. Or maybe everyone was wrong. Because everything that followed, the whispers, the shocks, the viral clips, the panicked exit, was built on misunderstandings stacked like dominoes. And the first domino was about to fall. She lifted her foot, stepped forward, forced herself into motion. But what came next would change everything, and no one saw it coming. She should have known the moment she stepped out of the car. That's the thought she would replay later. The tiny whisper of intuition that tried to warn her, tried to tug at her sleeve like a child urging an adult, don't go in there. Not tonight. Not like this. But intuition speaks softly, and the world she lived in was loud. Cameras, flashing bulbs, shouting paparazzi, screaming fans, PR assistants with clipboards, security guards moving like silent shadows, laughter that wasn't always laughter, smiles that didn't always reach the eyes. You know that feeling when your body senses danger before your mind does? When something in the air, something in the posture of the people around you, signals that tonight will not follow the script. That's the feeling she had. The car door opened. Cool night air rushed in, sharp and quick like an inhale before someone shouts. And just for a moment, Meghan didn't move. Her hand hovered near the door frame, suspended. There was nothing obviously wrong. No boos, no insults, no flashing red lights. But something had shifted. Then the shouting began. "Meghan, over here. Look to your left. Give us a smile." Turn toward the light. Nothing unusual, yet somehow wrong. Off rhythm. As if the excitement was forced, its edges just a little too frayed. Cameramen jostled for position, but their movements felt mechanical, not energized. The crowd cried out her name, but their tone lacked that usual electric punch. Everything felt like an imitation of real enthusiasm. She stepped out, and instantly, something in her chest tightened. There's an art to red carpet entrances. Confidence, timing, posture, presence. Too much humility, and you vanish. Too much arrogance, and you become a headline. Meghan knew the dance, knew how to glide, how to angle her shoulders, how to turn her chin just so. But tonight her steps were slightly too calculated, the way a dancer moves when she's afraid of missing the beat. The noise swelled around her. Cameras flared like tiny explosions. But beneath the glitter and glare lurked a silence behind the noise, that unnerved her. One she couldn't place. One that made her heartbeat drum louder than the photographer's calls. Have you ever walked into a room and sensed, not seen, not heard, but sensed, that something is off? That you're stepping into a conversation that started without you? That somehow, people already know something you don't? That's the emotional undercurrent running through her blood as she started down the carpet. To the outside world, she looked composed. Perfect even. To the trained observer, though, someone watching her eyes, her breathing, it was clear she was performing. Not in the glamorous star sense, but in the survival sense. She gave a small wave, a smile that felt too tight, a glance at a row of photographers. And that's when she noticed it, the first sign. At least 5 cameras lowered. Not dramatically, not maliciously, but noticeably. Lowered. As if in unspoken choreography. Imagine that. Imagine walking into a celebration where everyone is supposed to want your picture, and instead, several simply stop taking it. Did they lower them because they were adjusting settings? Possibly. Because they were waiting for a better angle? Maybe. Because they were distracted by someone behind her? Could be. But she didn't see the logic. She didn't feel the practicality. What she felt was rejection. An almost childlike sting she hadn't felt in years. She paused, just a split second. But in a world where every breath is recorded, every pause becomes a narrative. A photographer cleared his throat. Another shifted his camera strap. Someone in the distance coughed. The little noises hit her like taps on the shoulder. Then a woman near the barricade whispered, too loudly, "Why does she look nervous?" And the person next to her replied, "I heard something happened earlier." That was enough. Meghan's stomach dropped, because she knew exactly what they meant. That something earlier was the ghost that had been haunting her all day, the shadow she thought she'd shaken off by the time she arrived, but clearly hadn't. What was it? What had happened earlier? We're not there yet. That's a chapter for later. For now, all you need to know is this. She walked onto the red carpet already wounded, already carrying a weight she thought she could conceal beneath polished elegance. But emotional wounds bleed through fabric. They seep into posture. They distort smiles. She forced another smile now, though it cost her. Her heels clicked against the ground in perfectly measured rhythms. Each click felt like a countdown. Guests shuffled inside. Jewel-toned gowns swayed like soft waves. The giant L'Oréal Paris banners fluttered in the breeze, catching the light in a way that made the entire venue look surreal, like a dream she didn't fully belong to. And yet she continued forward, determined to make the entrance work. But that's when she noticed the second sign. The one that made her spine lock momentarily. The cluster. Every gala has one. That small tight knot of A-listers who gather near the entrance, usually greeting each other, hugging, laughing, posing for group shots. They're the power center of the carpet. Their approval determines who the photographers pay attention to, who gets the front page images, who becomes the star of the night. Tonight, the cluster stood to the right of the carpet, shimmering like a constellation of high-wattage spotlights. The kind of group whose presence makes even veteran celebrities straighten their posture. But this cluster wasn't laughing. They were looking at her. Not in malice. Not in mockery. Not even in judgment. Just looking. And that was somehow worse. Because it wasn't the look of people fascinated by her arrival. It wasn't the look of fans. It wasn't the look of enemies. It was the look of people waiting. Waiting for something. Waiting for her to do something. Waiting for something to happen. She met one of their eyes, just one, and immediately regretted it. The woman's expression flickered into something unclear, something unreadable, and then she turned her head, leaned in, whispered something to the person beside her. Meghan felt heat rise behind her ears. Her breathing sped up just enough for her to notice it. Not enough for anyone else to see, but enough to tighten her chest again. Why were they whispering? Were they talking about her? Were they confirming something? Were they expecting something? In the red carpet world, whispers are poison. The worst part? No one has to say a word for your mind to start writing the script. She looked ahead toward the entrance. It never felt farther away. She started walking again, but each step felt slower than the one before. Cameras flashed in bursts, not streams. The crowd's energy remained curiously flat. Each second layered something heavier on her shoulders. Have you ever been in a place where you knew you were being observed differently than usual? Where every tiny movement felt amplified. By the time she reached the midpoint of the carpet, her nerves were jangling. Then came the third sign. A staff member, clipboard in hand, headset wired behind her ear, stepped directly in her path. Not blocking her, but intersecting her trajectory just enough to force her to slow down. Staff always move with purpose, yes, but never into the path of the red carpet focal point. Meghan's step hesitated again. The staffer froze when she saw who she'd accidentally stepped in front of. Her eyes widened. She lifted her headset and murmured something quickly to someone on the other end. Meghan caught only one visible detail. The woman's cheeks flushed. Was it embarrassment? Or something else? Sorry, the staffer whispered, stepping aside. Meghan nodded politely, but her stomach was twisting itself into knots. Something was wrong. Something was off. Something was building. She just didn't know what. The lights. The whispers. The cluster. The lowered cameras. The red carpet that felt more like a tongue licking its teeth. This wasn't an entrance. It was a warning. But she pushed forward. If she stopped now, if she hesitated too long, people would notice. People always notice pauses. Especially hers. The cameras loved catching moments of vulnerability and spinning them into stories. She would not give them that. Not tonight. She adjusted her posture again, lifted her chin, and pressed forward with a gaze that said, I belong here. Even if she wasn't sure she believed it anymore. She reached the final stretch of the carpet. Relief began to seep in. She could see the staircase ahead. She could see guests entering the ballroom. She could sense the sanctuary just beyond the doors. But that's when it happened. The fourth sign. The one she couldn't ignore. The one that made her freeze in her tracks. Up near the top of the staircase, partly obscured by guests, stood someone watching her. Someone she did not expect. Someone who should not have been looking at her like that. Their expression wasn't angry, wasn't soft, wasn't neutral. It was something far more complicated. Recognition, tension, anticipation. Maybe even regret. Her throat tightened. She blinked, hoping she'd misinterpreted it. But the look remained. Her breath caught in her chest. Why were they here? Why now? How much did they know? She felt the entire carpet behind her swell with new energy, as if the crowd sensed something changing, something interesting, something combustible. And suddenly, she wasn't walking anymore. She wasn't posing. She wasn't breathing properly. She was frozen on the red carpet with every pair of eyes tracking her next move. She swallowed hard, because the person watching her had every reason to approach her, every reason to confront her, every reason to speak. But they didn't. They just watched, as if waiting for her to come to them. Her pulse thudded against her ribs like fists against a locked door. She took one unsteady breath, one tiny step forward, and then, the cliffhanger line. But what happened the moment she lifted her foot toward the staircase would change the tone of the entire night, and no one saw it coming. She didn't want to look back. That was the first instinct that fired through her as she reached the top of the staircase. The instinct to not let the moment swallow her whole. To keep moving. To pretend nothing unusual had happened on the carpet, even though her heartbeat was still ricocheting through her ribs like a frantic messenger begging to be taken seriously. But instinct is not always obedience. And curiosity? Curiosity is a creature with claws. So she looked back. Just for a second. Just long enough to see the bright pulse of camera flashes and to feel the collective attention still latched onto her like invisible hands. Just long enough to notice that the whispers had shifted tone, no longer flat, no longer bemused, but heightened, sharper, hungrier. The kind of whispers that said, "Something is happening. Something big." She tore her eyes away before the crowd could see her noticing them. One of the unwritten rules of celebrity appearances. Never let them see you react. Reaction is weakness. Reaction is story. Reaction is blood and water. She inhaled, straightened, and turned toward the entrance of the ballroom. And that's when the hook of Chapter 2 sunk in. She saw the seating chart. Not the digital PDF her assistant had shown her that morning. Not the final adjustments version that had been emailed by the organizers. Not the circled, color-coded diagram her team had printed. This was something else. This was the real one. Pinned on a gold-framed easel just inside the entrance, surrounded by flowers and soft amber lighting meant to flatter, a massive display detailed the event's official seating arrangement. And everything had changed. Do you know that feeling when your stomach drops before your mind fully registers why? When your body knows you're about to be disappointed or embarrassed or blindsided, before you even read the words. That's what hit her first. A jolt of cold, then heat, then cold again. She stepped closer, row by row, name by name, title by title, every VIP placement carefully arranged in elegant typeface. She scanned the A-list cluster, the Oscar winners, the iconic musicians, the world-famous philanthropists, women with decades-long careers, household name recognition, bulletproof reputations. Her eyes flicked down the list. One column, another, and then, there, her name. Except something was wrong. Wrong in a way that sent a tightening spiral straight through her chest. Why was she seated there? Why was she placed that far from the stage? Why was her row so different from the one she'd been originally assigned? And why was her seat now flanked on both sides not by fellow top-billing guests, but by? She stepped even closer, her breath catching. Was that a mistake? Was this some kind of oversight? Or was it intentional? Directly behind her, a guest murmured, "Oh, interesting." Interesting. A soft word with sharp edges. Another whispered, "They moved her? Seriously? Did she get bumped? She must have. No way that's accidental." Her spine tingled. The whispers weren't subtle. Not tonight. Not anymore. She blinked hard, trying to control her expression, to keep her face composed, to prevent the flush creeping up her neck from reaching her cheeks. Because what she was seeing felt like a demotion. A quiet one. A humiliating one. A symbolic one. And the timing. God, the timing was too precise to ignore. Too perfectly aligned with the way the air had shifted when she walked the carpet. Too aligned with the way that person had looked at her from the top of the stairs. Coincidence? Possibly. But in rooms like this, coincidence is rare. People say the seating chart at events like this is just logistics. But that's a lie. A beautiful, polite, socially acceptable lie. In reality, the seating chart is a battlefield map. One that tells you exactly who matters, who's rising, who's falling, who's in favor, and who's being quietly pushed to the periphery. Seating is power. Seating is currency. Seating is status. And tonight, her currency had crashed. She stared at the chart again, hoping to see a mistake. A harmless typo. Anything. But the ink was clear. The lines were straight. The formatting was flawless. This wasn't a mix-up. This was intentional. Someone had moved her. Someone had reclassified her. Someone had made a decision without telling her. Why? Why now? Why tonight? The crowd behind her began to shift, guests trickling in, skimming the chart, whispering their own reactions, none of which helped her steady her breath. One woman, brushing past, said under her breath, "Ouch. That's awkward." Another thought she'd be closer to the front. Then a particularly biting whisper. Guess the A-listers didn't want her at their table. Was that true? Was it speculation? Was it malice? Was it hearsay? Was it nothing? It didn't matter. Because perception was already solidifying. Perception becomes story long before truth enters the room. Meghan forced her eyes away from the chart, blinking rapidly, grounding herself. She couldn't let herself spiral. Not here. Not now. Not with so many eyes watching. Not with tonight already feeling so fragile. But a voice behind her shattered the last shred of composure she'd held onto. "Is everything all right?" The voice was soft. Sympathetic. but also dangerous. The kind of voice that asks a question not because it wants the answer, but because it wants to hear how you'll react. She swallowed, turned, and found herself face to face with one of the most influential publicists in the industry. A woman who knew everything. A woman who saw everything. A woman who noticed every crack in every facade. She forced a small smile. Of course, just taking a look. But the publicist's gaze wasn't fooled. She studied Meghan's face with an expression that was equal parts curious and calculating. Like she was assessing damage. Like she was predicting fallout. Interesting placement this year, the publicist said. A harmless comment. On paper. But in the air? In the context of this night? It was a blade. Meghan kept her voice steady. It's a lovely seating arrangement. The publicist tilted her head. Very intentional. The implication landed like a slap. Meghan didn't respond. Couldn't respond. Any response would have revealed too much. So she simply nodded and continued toward the ballroom entrance, feeling eyes trailing after her like phantom hands gripping the edges of her dress. Inside the grand ballroom, the lighting shifted from the sharp golds of the red carpet to a warm, diffused glow. Crystal chandeliers sparkled overhead, casting a honeyed radiance across tables draped in ivory silk. The air vibrated with the hum of conversation, the clinking of glasses, the soft shuffle of gowns brushing the floor. On any other night, the atmosphere would have been intoxicating. Tonight it felt claustrophobic. Her assigned table, round, elegant, decorated with floral arrangements that looked like they belonged on magazine covers, was positioned closer to the middle of the room. Not terrible, not offensive, but not where she was supposed to be, not where she had been promised. She sat. A mistake, because the moment she did, she felt it, the shift, the subtle, undeniable tightening of attention around her. Her seatmates, a philanthropist she had never met and an actress best known for a breakout role years ago, exchanged glances. Small, polite smiles. But their eyes betrayed something else. Curiosity, caution, maybe even pity. Her jaw clenched. She glanced around the room. There, near the front, the A-lister cluster sat together. Laughing, clinking glasses, glowing with the confidence of people who knew they belonged exactly where they were. And in the middle of that group, she saw them again. The person from the top of the stairs. Watching her. Still. As if waiting. As if expecting something. Her pulse flickered with unease. What did they know? What had they heard? Why did their gaze feel like a countdown? She looked away quickly, focusing instead on her tablecloth, her glass, the floral centerpiece. Anything to avoid that stare. But the silence around her seat lengthened. Conversations at her table remained thin, polite, surface level. She knew what this meant. The seating chart wasn't a coincidence. Someone had set a tone. She was being handled. She was being positioned. She was being tested. And the worst part? She didn't know why. Not yet. But she would. Soon. A server approached. "Can I get you anything to start?" Her reply was automatic. "Water, please." Her voice sounded normal. Calm. Controlled. But her fingers trembled. She hid her hands under the table. Across the room, the gala's host stepped onto the stage, smiling broadly, holding a microphone. The lights shifted. Music softened. Conversations faded. The event was officially beginning, and she felt more exposed than she had at any point on the red carpet. As she sat there, trying desperately to steady her breathing, the host's voice echoed through the room, warm and celebratory. But she barely heard the first line, because at that moment, someone slipped quietly into the chair beside her. Someone who wasn't supposed to be seated at her table. Someone who leaned in. Someone who whispered something that made her blood run cold. That whisper? That was the real turning point. But what they said, what those 4 quiet words were, would change the course of her night in ways she never imagined. And no one saw it coming. The whisper hit her like a cold wind. For tiny words. Barely audible. Spoken so close to her ear, she felt them more than heard them. And yet, the moment they landed, her heart stumbled in her chest. Did they tell you? That was it. Just 4 words. 4 words that contained an entire avalanche. 4 words that immediately forced her mind into 100 directions. None of them comforting. All of them spiraling. Did who tell her what? Was this about the seating change? About the whispers on the carpet? About the person staring at her from across the room? About what happened earlier that day? Her breath caught in her throat. She turned slowly, unsure of who would be sitting beside her, unsure of what expression she'd find, unsure of whether her face could hide the sudden panic clawing up her chest. It was him, the man who had slipped into the seat so quietly she hadn't noticed. Older, impeccably dressed, with the kind of polite smile that hid too much. A man known in the industry for being charming in public and brutal in private. A man who'd built a career on secrets, not keeping them, but knowing how to use them. He lifted his glass in a casual greeting, as if he hadn't just detonated a bomb in her lap. "Lovely evening, isn't it?" She tried to form a response, but her mind was buzzing. Every instinct she had screamed danger. Not loud danger. Not dramatic danger. Worse, subtle danger. The kind wrapped in silk and poured into champagne flutes. She forced a nod. "It is." Her voice came out steady. She wasn't sure how. He leaned back in his chair, crossing his legs, looking completely at ease. Completely comfortable. As if he belonged at her table. As if he belonged everywhere. He didn't. His name wasn't on the seating chart. She'd scanned it thoroughly. Twice. So why was he here? And why had he asked that question? "Did they tell you?" She stared at him, struggling to read his expression. Was he baiting her? Testing her? Warning her? The room hummed around them as the gala host continued speaking on stage, announcing honorees, celebrating achievements, describing decades of progress. Laughter rippled from nearby tables. Toasts lifted in sparkling arcs. Applause echoed like warm waves. But none of it touched her. Her world had shrunk to the man beside her, and the question that felt like it had been sharpened before being placed in her ear. She lowered her voice. "Tell me what exactly." He smiled again, wider this time. Too wide. "Oh," he said lightly. "So they didn't." Her breath faltered. She hated this. Hated the dance of half-truths, innuendo, suggestion. She had spent years navigating public scrutiny, but navigating private manipulation? That was something else entirely. "What are you talking about?" she asked quietly, keeping her gaze fixed on the stage as if they were merely exchanging polite conversation. He tapped his finger against the stem of his glass. "You'll find out soon enough, I suppose." She gripped the edge of her seat beneath the table, her nails pressing into the padded fabric. Find out what? But he didn't answer. Instead, his attention drifted across the room, to the A-lister cluster at the front, to the person watching her earlier, to the table of executives, to the organizers sitting near the stage. His eyes flicked between them like someone who already knew the outcome of a game she didn't even realize she was playing. Then he turned back to her with a soft, almost sympathetic sigh. "Don't worry," he said. "It's not entirely your fault." Her pulse jumped. Not entirely? What did that mean? She felt a flash of heat in her chest. A mix of anger, fear, confusion. "What isn't my fault?" she pressed, her voice still soft but trembling at the edges. Again, he didn't answer. Instead, he looked at her the way a doctor looks at a patient before delivering bad news. A look that carries the heaviness of inevitability. "You should prepare yourself," he said. Prepare herself? For what? Her vision tunneled slightly, not enough to panic, but enough to make her feel like she was no longer fully in the room. The edges of the world blurred. The chandeliers dimmed. Her breathing became too loud in her own head. She wanted to get up, to leave the table, to get a glass of water, to find someone on her team, to do anything other than sit there with this man weaving cryptic knots around her. But she couldn't. Standing up too abruptly would draw attention, and attention was the last thing she wanted right now. She forced herself to inhale slowly, counting the seconds, grounding her body back into the chair. He took a slow sip of his drink, watching her over the rim. "I'll say this," he murmured, "just so you're not completely blindsided." She turned her head toward him slightly, barely moving her lips. "Say what?" He leaned in. Not close enough to seem intimate, but close enough to ensure no one could overhear. "There's been a development." The words sent a shiver down her spine. "What kind of development?" "The kind," he replied, "that tends to change the tone of a room." Her breath tightened. "You're being vague on purpose." He chuckled softly. "Of course I am. You know how this world works." A beat of silence passed. Then another. He sighed again, feigning reluctance. As if he didn't want to tell her, but felt obligated by some twisted sense of courtesy. "I suppose you'll see soon enough," he said, glancing toward the stage. Her body went cold. Was the announcement coming? Was it part of the event? Something planned? Something meant to be revealed publicly? She opened her mouth to respond. And that's when the applause erupted. Loud, enthusiastic, full-bodied applause that swept through the ballroom like a crashing wave. She jolted slightly, pulled back into the present moment, forced to refocus as the host introduced the next honoree. Smiles, cheers, celebration. But she couldn't feel any of it. Her mind replayed the man's words in a loop. Did they tell you? You'll find out soon enough. It's not entirely your fault. There's been a development. Every sentence felt like a shard of glass. She tried to watch the stage, tried to follow the speech, tried to look like she was part of the event. But every time she straightened her posture, she felt a gaze. A heavy one. She glanced across the room, and there they were again. The person from the staircase. Still watching her. Still waiting. Their expression unreadable. Their body language still. Their attention unmoving. She swallowed hard. What did they know? What were they expecting? Her heart raced. She turned back to the man beside her, but he was gone. At some point during the applause, while her attention had been pulled elsewhere, he had slipped away as quietly as he had arrived. His chair was empty, his glass half finished, his presence erased, as if he had never been there at all. Her fingers curled tightly against her napkin. What was happening? Why did it feel like she was the only one in the room who didn't know the script? Her table mates tried to make conversation now that the atmosphere had lightened, but she could barely hear them. Their words blended into the background noise like soft static. Everything inside her was tightening, coiling, bracing, because something was coming. Something that tied together the red carpet tension, the seating chart change, the whispers, the stare from across the room, the man's for cryptic words. There was a narrative building around her, a narrative she had no control over. And then, a small, polite chime sounded across the ballroom. A signal, a cue. The room quieted instantly. Spotlights shifted. Music softened. The host smiled brightly from the stage. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, "before we continue with tonight's honorees, we have a special announcement." Her blood froze. People leaned forward. Whispers fluttered across tables. The person from the staircase straightened. Her heart hammered in her chest. The host continued. "This is an update we felt was important to share with all of you. Something that developed earlier today." Earlier today. Her stomach dropped. No, not that. Not here. Not now. She gripped the table, nails digging into the linen. And though it was unexpected, the host said, "We believe transparency is key." The spotlight intensified. Her breathing quickened. Her vision sharpened into a narrow tunnel pointed at the stage. Because she knew, or thought she knew, exactly what was coming next. But what the host said, what he revealed, what the room heard, was worse. Far, far worse. And she never saw it coming. It happened in a flash. Not the literal flash of cameras. Those came later, but the mental kind. The kind where one moment stretches into slow motion, the world tilts, and you feel yourself sliding into a scene you never asked to star in. Before we continue, the host repeated with a warm, practiced smile. We have a brief change to tonight's presentation. A change. The word hit her nerves like electricity. People love the word change when it comes to fashion or personal growth. But in events like this, in meticulously choreographed, reputation-sensitive, socially delicate environments, change is a landmine. We've made an adjustment to one of the evening's segments, the host said. Something that developed earlier today. A ripple of whispers crossed the tables. She felt the sound rather than heard it. A vibration under the skin, unsettling and electric. Earlier today, her worst fear. The room leaned in. Her body leaned back. Even the chandeliers seemed to hold their breath, their shimmering edges stilling as though listening. Due to an unexpected scheduling shift, the host continued. We're moving one of our special spotlight moments earlier. Spotlight moment? Her throat tightened. Spotlight could mean anything. A tribute, a surprise award, a celebrity speech, a recognition segment, something public, something visible, something she wasn't prepared for. Please not me. Please not now. Please not after everything. She pressed her palm against her thigh under the table to steady herself. She could feel her own pulse hammering through her skin. As you know, the host said, each year we honor women whose humanitarian efforts inspire millions. And tonight, we're thrilled to spotlight. A pause. A dramatic pause. The kind that always precedes applause. Her lungs locked. Someone shifted at the VIP table in front. A rustle of sequins, a quiet breath. And joining us for this earlier spotlight moment is a very special guest who has supported women's empowerment initiatives worldwide. No, her vision swayed. No, no, no. Ladies and gentlemen, the host beamed. Please welcome. Her fingers clawed at the tablecloth, bracing for her name. Global ambassador and award-winning humanitarian, Sophia Delacourt. The applause exploded. Her breath did not. In fact, for a moment, she forgot how to breathe entirely. Because it wasn't her. It wasn't her name. And the shock didn't hit like relief. It hit like betrayal. Not because she wanted the spotlight. Not because she expected it. But because she was supposed to present this segment. Her, not Sophia. It had been planned for weeks. Her speech had been reviewed, approved, edited. Her appearance in this spotlight was part of tonight's entire PR structure. Her presence at the gala was partially centered around it. This was the development. This was the change. They had removed her from the segment without telling her. Removed her. Replaced her. Without warning. Without explanation. Without courtesy. The humiliation didn't come quickly. It came as a slow, creeping burn that began in the pit of her stomach and climbed its way up her chest, wrapping around her lungs like vines. Her face went warm. Her ears rang. Her muscles tightened one by one. Because suddenly everything made sense. The lowered cameras. The stares on the carpet. The seating chart shift. The publicist's comment. The man whispering, "Did they tell you?" The person watching her from across the room. Someone knew. Many people probably knew. Everyone except her. Sophia Delacourt. A glamorous, universally adored philanthropist whose presence could fill a stadium, stood from her front row seat, beaming as she made her way toward the stage. The applause kept going. Tables rose around her. Standing ovation. A full, dazzling eruption of praise. And Sophia deserved every clapping hand. This story is not her fault. The issue wasn't Sophia. The issue was the message. The silent, searing, unmistakable message. You weren't supposed to be the center of this moment anymore. You weren't the right fit for tonight's narrative. You weren't the one they wanted representing this message. The realization hit her like a wave. She stayed seated. She had no choice. To stand now would be bizarre, attention-seeking, even. But remaining seated felt like being publicly shelved. Her hands curled into fists beneath the table. Sophia took the stage with that effortless charm the world adored, delivering the speech Meghan had practiced. The same themes, the same tone, the same talking points. A perfect replacement. The words echoed through the ballroom. Empowerment, visibility, solidarity, voice, leadership. Every word was a needle. Her vision blurred slightly, not from tears, but from a sharp, sudden anger she had nowhere to place. Why hadn't they told her? Why had they waited until the lights were on, the cameras rolling, the audience watching? Why had they left her exposed? Was this a warning? A punishment? A message? She wasn't sure which answer was worse. She glanced at the drink in front of her. It shimmered under the ambient glow of the chandeliers. Her hand trembled slightly as she reached for it. She needed a distraction, a small, grounding action. She took a sip. The cold liquid steadied her briefly, until she felt it. The stare. Again, she turned her head, heart lurching. There, the same person from the staircase, watching her throughout Sophia's speech. Not smiling, not frowning, not judging, just watching. Steady, focused, unmoving. Their gaze wasn't cruel, but it was piercing, too perceptive, too knowing, like someone watching a crack spread through a window pane, waiting to see how far the damage would go. She dropped her gaze immediately. Her pulse was speeding up again. Not now. Not here. Not in front of everyone. She inhaled through her nose, held it, exhaled slowly. If she could just get through the segment, she told herself. Just survive the next 10 minutes. Then she could slip away quietly, find her team, get answers, regain control. But control is a fragile thing, and she didn't realize how much she'd already lost. The applause roared again as Sophia finished her speech. Standing ovation number 2. Her table rose. Even she had to stand. Not doing so would have been a statement in itself. So she pushed up from her chair, smiling politely, clapping gently. She kept her eyes on the stage, not on the cameras. But cameras found her anyway. They always do. And tonight, they captured something she didn't intend. A micro-expression, a flicker, a flash of something vulnerable before she could bury it. The kind of image that can be twisted, cropped, zoomed, interpreted, misinterpreted, posted, speculated about, weaponized. She felt the lens on her, felt its hunger. Her stomach twisted again. Sophia descended from the stage, glowing under the lights. Her seatmates hugged her. The room buzzed with admiration. It was a triumphant moment. A moment that, only hours ago, had been hers. And then, the host spoke again. And now, before we continue, would our seated guests please remain where you are? We'll be transitioning into a brief highlight reel. Her blood pressure spiked. A highlight reel meant the lights would dim. Cameras would scan the room. Spotlights would shift. Faces would be shown on the screens. She wasn't ready. Her pulse hammered harder. A whisper from her right. "Oh, she doesn't look happy." A whisper from her left. "I'd be upset too." A third voice behind her. "Think she knew?" That word again. Knew. No. Tell. Did they tell you? She felt it all converging. Like the room was slowly folding in on her. Table by table, whisper by whisper, gaze by gaze. The lights dimmed. The opening notes of the highlight reel music swelled. The room glowed with shifting blues and golds. She tried to lower her gaze, to disappear into the moment, to make herself invisible. But the universe had different plans. Because just as the lights began to flicker across the audience, a spotlight snapped on. Not on the stage, not on the host, not on Sophia, on her. A full beam, bright, unfiltered, unwanted. The light hit her like a physical blow. Her eyes widened. Her breath halted. Every head in her section turned. Every whisper died. And the cameras, oh, the cameras, swung instantly toward the light. Toward her. She couldn't move, couldn't breathe, couldn't understand why she, of all people, was suddenly illuminated. Until she heard the click. The unmistakable click of a microphone being turned on. She wasn't supposed to speak tonight. Not anymore. So why? Why was the microphone in front of her lighting up? Dead center on her table. The tiny red dot glowing. Waiting. Inviting. Exposing. Her heart slammed against her ribs. Someone grabbed the mic. Someone placed it there. When? How? Who? She reached toward it instinctively. Not to use it, but to turn it off. To stop this before it spiraled. But before her fingers touched it, a voice behind her whispered, "They're doing this on purpose." Her blood ran cold. She froze. People were watching her so intently now that if she blinked wrong it would become a headline. Her vision tunneled. She couldn't tell who whispered it. She didn't turn around. She didn't dare. Instead, she swallowed hard, her throat tight, her breath thin. She reached for the microphone, but her hand trembled. And that tiny tremble, caught by at least 4 cameras, would be analyzed 1,000 different ways before sunrise. The spotlight brightened. The room held its breath. She touched the mic. And what happened next? What happened in the very moment her fingers brushed the cold metal? Is the moment the entire night pivoted on. Because someone she never expected, spoke from behind her. And their words changed everything. The moment stretched like a rubber band pulled too tight. Her fingers hovered over the microphone, the cold metal humming with the faint vibration of the live feed. The spotlight burned white across her face, flattening every shadow, making her exposed in the one place she hoped to blend quietly into the background. And then, a voice. Soft. Low. Too close. Don't touch it. 3 words. 3 words spoken in a tone so calm, so chillingly certain, that her entire body froze. She felt the breath of them against her ear before the meaning even landed. Her hand stopped in midair. Her heart tripped into a painful, uneven rhythm. Because that voice, that tone, she recognized it. Not personally, but socially, professionally. The kind of voice that never spoke unless it knew something other people didn't. She didn't turn around. Couldn't turn around. Not with the entire ballroom watching. Not with cameras poised, waiting for her next movement. Not with the spotlight pinning her like a butterfly under glass. She swallowed, her throat tight. The microphone gleamed in front of her, waiting like a trap. The voice spoke again. Let them handle it. Let who handle what? Her eyes darted to the stage. The host was still smiling, too brightly, too tightly, but his gaze wasn't on the audience anymore. It was on the production crew clustered near the technical booth. Something was happening behind the scenes. Something unscripted. Something unexpected. Something she wasn't supposed to be pulled into. Her pulse pounded. She forced herself to breathe. Slow inhale, slow exhale. But the air felt too warm, too thick, clinging to her lungs like syrup. The spotlight didn't flicker, didn't move, didn't release her. And that's when the room shifted. Not physically, but emotionally. A collective tightening. A shared pause. People sensed it. The tension, the confusion, the feeling that they were witnessing something they shouldn't be seeing. A moment that wasn't part of the show but had become, without warning, the center of it. A few murmurs broke out. Why is she lit? Is she speaking? Was this planned? What happened to the original program? Her pulse throbbed in her temples. She finally managed to whisper, barely moving her lips. What's happening? The voice behind her inhaled sharply, as if choosing its next words with surgical care. Then, they weren't supposed to switch the segment, the voice murmured. Someone pushed it forward. She stiffened. Pushed? Forward? As in deliberately? As in, against the original plan? Her mind spun. Someone behind her shifted, creating a tiny breeze against her shoulder. Whoever this was, they were close enough that she could feel the presence of their body heat. Don't speak, the voice added. Not yet, but the spotlight stayed locked on her. Her instincts battled each other. One screamed, stay silent. Another screamed, say something. A third whispered, run. She couldn't do any of them. She was frozen in her chair as one of the event producers, a woman with a headset and an expression that suggested her blood pressure just spiked 20 points, hurried toward the stage. The host cleared his throat. Well, seems we're having a bit of a cueing delay, he said, his professional cheer faltering at the edges. Cueing delay. A pretty phrase for, the show is malfunctioning. She noticed something then. Something subtle. Something she wouldn't have seen if she weren't hyper-aware of every flicker in the room. Two of the cameras had shifted, not toward the host, not toward the stage, but toward the technical booth. Why? What had they seen? Her breath hitched. Someone leaned slightly around her peripheral vision. The person from behind her trying to see the booth as well. This wasn't an accident, they whispered. Her heart plummeted. Not an accident. Then what? A setup? A mistake? A message? She turned her head a fraction of an inch, just enough to speak without moving too obviously. Who are you? She whispered. The answer came fast. I'm the person who tried to stop this. Her stomach lurched. Stop what? The spotlight? The microphone? The program change? She couldn't comprehend it all at once. Her brain felt like it was buffering, glitching, processing pieces too fast and too slow at the same time. Why would they? But she didn't finish the question. Because something shifted in the corner of her eye. A man in a suit, one she recognized vaguely as part of the event's security staff, was crossing the ballroom. Not casually, not discreetly, deliberately. His eyes weren't scanning the room. They were fixed directly on her. Her pulse spiked, so hard she felt lightheaded. Why was security coming toward her? Had she broken some rule? Was she part of some miscue? Was this about that spotlight? About the microphone? About the segment switch? Or had someone? No, she couldn't think that. Not yet. She forced herself to breathe again. In, out, in, out. But the breaths weren't calming her. The security guard moved faster now, gliding between tables with practiced precision, his expression unreadable. Her grip tightened on the edge of the table. The person behind her, still unseen, still anonymous, leaned in one final time. When he gets here, the voice whispered, do not argue. Her skin prickled. Her eyes widened. Why? She breathed. Because if you do, the voice said, they'll turn this moment into something it wasn't. A chill tore through her spine. They'll twist it, the voice continued softly. And they're already looking for a headline. Her blood ran cold. A headline. Of course. That's always the danger. The power. The curse. The weapon. A single misstep. A gesture. A tone. A facial twitch. One out-of-context clip. One misinterpreted moment. And the narrative shifts. She had been here before. Not here. Not in a spotlight malfunction at a gala with 800 people watching, but somewhere adjacent. Somewhere where perception mattered more than truth. Somewhere where silence could be seen as guilt, and speaking could be twisted into something else entirely. Her heart thudded dully in her chest. The security guard reached her table. He bent down slightly, lowering his voice so only she and her table mates could hear. Ma'am, he said gently. Would you mind stepping backstage for a moment? Her breath caught. Backstage? Where? Why? For what? Her gaze flicked involuntarily toward the stage. The host was still talking, trying to stall, trying to smooth the tension with cheerful improv. But his eyes kept darting toward the technical booth. People were watching her now with different expressions. Curiosity, concern, confusion, judgment, suspicion. The spotlight was still on her. Still burning. Still demanding. The room felt too small. Too tight. Too bright. The security guard spoke again, softer this time. It's all right. Just a quick clarification. Clarification? Of what? Her presence? The misunderstanding? The microphone? The program? The development the man had hinted at? Please, he added, come with me. For a moment, just a second, she considered refusing, considered staying seated, smiling, pretending nothing was wrong, letting the moment pass. But that voice behind her, do not argue, and her instincts, sharp, protective, whispering warnings she couldn't ignore, told her the same. She nodded slowly. Of course. The spotlight cut off instantly, as if someone had been waiting for that exact moment. She blinked hard, adjusting to the sudden dimness. Cameras moved away. Whispers surged. The host's voice grew louder, filling the space with scripted warmth to distract from the tension. She rose from her chair. Her legs were shaky but steady enough. The security guard stepped aside, creating a small, discreet path between tables. She felt dozens of eyes on her. She kept her head high anyway, because if there was one thing she'd learned over the years, it was this. If they're going to watch you, make them watch your strength. She walked forward, calm, graceful, controlled. But inside she felt like a storm had cracked open. As she neared the side door leading backstage, she risked one last glance over her shoulder. And that's when she saw it. The person who'd stood on the staircase earlier, the one who had watched her all night, was no longer across the room. They were following her. Not obviously, not hurriedly, but deliberately, step by step, like this moment was something they had been waiting for. Her breath hitched as she stepped through the door. And what she found on the other side was nothing like what she expected. The door closed with a soft click behind her. A quiet click. Too quiet. The kind that makes the silence louder. For a heartbeat, she just stood there, half in shadow, half in the thin glow of the backstage lights, trying to make sense of what she was seeing. Because this wasn't the backstage she expected. No bustling crew. No frantic producers. No monitors showing the live event. No assistants with clipboards, walkie-talkies, or headsets buzzing with instructions. Just a hallway. A long, narrow, dim hallway that looked nothing like the polished, glamorous event she'd just left. Industrial carpet. Metal doors. Cold air humming from exposed vents. It felt like the corridor of a convention center, not the backstage of an elite gala. She blinked, tried to ground herself. Then, please keep walking, the security guard said, gently gesturing forward. His tone wasn't rude. It wasn't aggressive, but it carried something else. Urgency. She hesitated. Where exactly are we going? The producers need to speak with you, he replied. How many? Just a few. She didn't like that answer. Too vague. Too controlled. Too rehearsed. She glanced behind her. The door was still closed, but she knew, she felt, that someone was on the other side of it. Watching, waiting, following. The person from the staircase. Her breath wavered. She turned back to the corridor. Is there a problem? She asked quietly. The security guard didn't respond immediately. His jaw tightened just a fraction, so small that anyone else might have missed it. But she didn't. No problem, he said finally. They just need clarification. Clarification about the spotlight. He paused again. Too long. Much too long. Yes, he said. That. A word that meant everything and nothing. She swallowed. The hallway stretched ahead. Straight. Then curving slightly to the right, where a faint blue glow pulsed from an unseen room. She forced herself to move. One step, then another. Her heels clicked softly against the floor, echoing faintly in the narrow space. She could hear something behind the walls, a low thrum of machinery, the muffled bass of event music, distant applause carried through ventilation ducts. But here it felt deserted, like the nerve center of the gala had been transplanted somewhere else entirely. Is this the usual backstage route? She asked. The guard answered too quickly. Yes. A lie. She could hear the lie in his tone, crisp and clean like glass breaking. And she had enough experience with interviews, negotiations, public events, and behind-the-scenes politics to know when someone was parroting a script. Her pulse quickened. She slowed down, and the guard noticed. "Everything's fine," he assured her. "We just need." But he didn't finish, because suddenly, voices around the corner. Not loud, not chaotic, focused, controlling. One voice in particular cut through the rest, sharp, authoritative, giving clipped instructions with an edge of frustration. "We were supposed to be notified before the transition," the voice snapped. There was no cue. None. A second voice murmured something unintelligible. "No," the first voice hissed. "That wasn't an accident. Someone moved the spotlight. Someone moved the mic." Her blood went cold. Someone moved the spotlight. Someone moved the mic.